Have you ever thought about how many decisions go into what we read in the Bible and how we make sense of what we're reading? Look, obviously translation is a complex process and there's a lot of subjectivity there in what words that we choose, but even things like where we break verses and where verses are broken into paragraphs has a big impact on how we perceive the words that we're reading. And there's an example of this in 1 Timothy. The writer is talking about the heritage that Timothy has, his mother and his grandmother, but the choice of where to insert a paragraph break makes a big difference in how we perceive what it is that Timothy receives from this incredible legacy of these women in his ancestry.
See, there's this passage in 2 Timothy where the writer is composing a letter to a young pastor, almost a protege, you might say. And I love it because the letter opens this way: "To Timothy, my dear son, I thank God whom I serve just as my ancestors did. I am now reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I'm now persuaded lives also in you." Keep in mind here, this is a conversation that's happening probably between the first and the second generation of Christian followers. And we're already seeing references to our ancestors. References to mothers and grandmothers called out by name to acknowledge what's handed down to us through family. And how important it is to be reminded of everything we've been given. I mean, imagine if you and I, if we knew a little bit more about Eunice and Lois, I'd love to read that. I'd love to learn from them. Because, and I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but there's this interesting debate about these two. There's this statement about them and their influence, and then some translations, like the NIV, which I'm reading from, they insert a new heading here, and they begin a new paragraph as if the writer's moving on to something else. But there's actually a really good argument to just keep the narrative flowing here, like most translations do, like the NRSV does. "I'm now reminded of your sincere faith, Timothy, faith which first lived in your grandmother and your mother, faith I'm now persuaded lives in you, and for this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of hands, for the Spirit of God has not made us timid, but instead given us power and love and self-discipline." Famous verse, but the implication here is that everything gifted to Timothy actually roots itself all the way back in the legacy of Eunice and Lois. Power and love and self-discipline. Sometimes that's what we get from our moms. Now, at the same time, I get it, right? No one here in the room has the same story of family as anyone else. And I'm not interested in re-narrating your history for you. All I'm saying is that my summer spaces have reminded me of the gift of my family and the responsibility that I now have to work to carry that forward for my kids today.
Hey, look, if you made it through that video, thanks. Really appreciate the click and the time that you've given us to listen to some of the things that we're reflecting on here in the community. If you're interested in more of the work that Commons is doing, by all means, subscribe to the page, give us a like, throw a comment down below, but also check out our Discord, where we're inviting the community to have all kinds of different conversations about what it means to follow Jesus here in the modern world.